planned 70-minute discussion to 60 minutes. We'll have about 40 minutes for discussion and 20 minutes for Q&A. I know Sunil has introduced the panelists, but I'd like to introduce little more so that you know the context and the questions that are being put to them. Satish is the Managing Director of India Partners, and prior to India, he was a partner at Venture East and DFJ. And before he wore the VC hat, he's done the full gamut of being a founder, CEO, and worked at large multinational companies like Broadcom and NXP. Sambit is the quintessential, large company veteran. He's vice president of the network and edge group at Intel. He leads the worldwide engineering team responsible for product design and development across IoT, intelligent edge, AI, client, and networking products. It's delivered 70 plus innovative products in all these years. And he's also worked with large MNCs like Qualcomm and Sun Microsystems in the past. We have Ruchir Dixit, is the country manager at Mentor. In his 20 plus years in the semiconductor industry, Ruchir has worked on 200 plus IC tape outs and with customers across the world. In fact, he moved to India in 2005 to build Mentor's customer-facing business. Then we have Atul Vish. Nothing is complete without the government. He is a senior AVP and head of the ESDM Technology, Media and Telecom Division at Invest India. He heads Indian government's Make in India mandate, acts as the chief evangelist and developer. So we have a variety of experienced people here. Let me get started with Satish. You've run the full course, been on all sides of the fence. Where do you think is the semiconductor industry poised at this time? Is this a crucial phase where it can take off, or do you think still a lot of preparatory work needs to be done?
So, Seema, I'm assuming your question is more around India context.
Yes, absolutely.
Also, startup context, correct?
Yes.
I think it's in a very, very nascent. I don't think we're there yet. When you really look at SaaS or edtech or fintech, or even e-commerce and marketplaces, I think whether fabless or semiconductor or even hardware for that matter, I think it's in a very nascent stage. I don't think it is an industry yet. But the hope is that you need it now, sooner than later, no doubt. You know about the chip shortage around the globe. I think the pandemic has kind of altered the world in political equations. Given that semiconductors are kind of the new oil, you have no choice but to obviously invest and grow this ecosystem sooner than later.
Ruchir, can I come to you next? You came back in 2005 to build, customer-facing business. Obviously, India had changed, and it was a new thing that you wanted to do. What do you think is the USP of the Indian ecosystem now? Have we moved beyond cost arbitrage?
Oh, wow. Okay. Cost arbitrage, before I come to that and what I have seen since 2005, I think it's important to look at how we started. And some of us here who are old enough will remember Texas Instruments starting in 1985 in India. And on the backs of TI, other companies started to come to India. And if I were to make a guess, a lot of those companies started in India because there was a bright young Indian origin engineer who said that, you know what, I can go back home, I can go back to India from wherever I'm working at, either in the US or in Europe somewhere, and start a small branch office in India and start to develop some value adds to my parent company. So my suspicion is that's how it began. Over time, we started to build engineers through our education system. And then companies started to realize that, yes, there is a cost advantage and there is cost arbitrage. And things can be done in India because the talent exists, and a majority or almost all of the talent that exists is very good in English. So communication was not a barrier. and the skills was not a barrier. Over time, since I moved back in 2005, what I've seen is a big evolution in all of these companies and the talent pool in India. In the beginning, the teams in India were implementing the spec that was given to them. Over time, we have evolved from that space to now we are building the spec. We are looking at what the market needs. We are building a specification for what a product might look like, what problems it solves, and we're delivering it. And along with that, what happened was that our sheer talent became the predominant factor for people to look at India as a country where they want to come to. Not because of cost arbitrage. Yes, there are some cost advantages that still exist, but that's not the driving force anymore. I mean, Sambit is here who's representing Intel, and yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we'll hear from all these large semiconductor companies who have their offices and very, very large design sites in India. And they will tell you that the reason they keep expanding is because of the availability of talent and not just because it's cheap. So to me, it's a matter of pride that we should all have to, in ourselves and the community who's listening, that we have changed the face of India in the semiconductor world in the last 15 years, from cost arbitrage to talent availability.
Okay, so that's a nice segue for Sambit, because you said, large design houses here, but they're all, and there's talent here, but they're all captive talent, right? A lot of, much has not percolated into the ecosystem, which is still very, very tiny. And if I'm correct, it's just about $100 million in revenue that the fabless ecosystem can sort of claim. So Sambit, you've been in Intel for very long. Intel has been in India for very long. What do you think has changed in last few years, where you think that we are ripe for a much deeper collaboration with the startup community?
Well, I've been with Intel for the last 5 years, and before that, I was with Qualcomm for 4 years. And just like Ruchir, I came back to India in 2005, and I have seen really massive growth in the talent in the India ecosystem. And we are seeing the benefits of those talents and the growth in the last 15 years. Right now, you will see there are lots and lots of excellent startups working on IoT, AI, not necessarily semiconductor play, but using semiconductor chips, building IoT, AI, networking solutions. So to me, that's a big step. The other thing is the amount of talent, the experience, the confidence, the impact that we have created in the last 15 years in semiconductors has been magnificent. And if you look at semiconductor history, I mean, developed countries or developed in semiconductors like US or Israel, they have taken 15, 20 years before they could really make a lot of innovations in semiconductors. So I think in India, the talent we have built, the confidence we have built, the ecosystem we have built, all these things we have built, I would say maybe we're a step or two away from really taking off in the semiconductor, particularly in the fabless area. And uh, and all the big companies, government, academics, everything is all coming together, to propel this. I mean, Intel has a lot of wonderful programs. They have, in the last 5 years, they have engaged with 35 startups, and then we created this plug-in alliance recently between Intel, IIT Bombay, the government, enterprises, entrepreneurs, uh, to target Industry 4.0, which is really a big deal, and bring in a lot of technologies in IoT, AR, VR, robotics, all these things as Industry 4.0. So I think there's been a lot of development, a lot of progress, and in semiconductor fabless space, I would say we are probably a step or two away from really taking off. And what we need is creative minds, innovative minds to come forward, and we need the big companies and the government to continue to support and encourage them.
Okay, on that note, I'll come, Atul, I'll come to you after one round so that, you hear what, these people have to say. So Sambit said, that we are 1 or 2 steps away. Satish, coming back to you, if you plot the chart of the components in the semiconductor industry, whether it's design, whether it's EDA tools, whether it's manufacturing, everything is outside India. In India, we say design, but it's mostly inside the MNC, sort of campus, inside the MNC buildings. So if we have to do something in the near term to start, everybody's saying we are 1 or 2 steps away. What is it that needs to be done to get it jump started in near term? Because fab is, Atul will speak about it, but fab is still a few years away. Even if we put money on the table, there'll be a couple of years before the actual benefits start. But in fabless, I guess we are much ahead than, say, a fab sort of a requirement. So near term, what do you think we should be doing?
Yeah, so Seema, kind of, if I wear the VC hat, if you really look at what entrepreneurs are doing right now, not just in Fabless, I'll come to Fabless in a quick, minute. Entrepreneurs are building product where there is talent, selling where there's market, raising capital where they get a premium, exit where they get the maximum multiple. So they're so smart, right? So obviously, entrepreneurship does not know any boundaries. Let's just borrow a leaf from the SaaS playbook. I think India has done wonderfully well in IT services. Now India is doing great in SaaS products. So the reason why you do really well in SaaS is that it costs you very little to experiment. It costs you less than $1 million, and 9 to 12 months. You fail fast and fail cheap is the mantra. In semiconductors, there's nothing called fail fast, fail cheap. You're talking about $10 million in 2 years. And that initial capital of $10 million, nobody is willing to give to entrepreneurs. So to me, I think the best thing that would happen in India to jumpstart this is folks in here who are part of the panel and who are part of IESA and outside. I think you should simply have credits. I mean, I think if EDA companies could come together and give EDA credits, TSMC and Global Foundries kinds of fabs could come and give shuttle run credits. That's good enough for entrepreneurs. They would use those credits and prototype their ideas. Today, FPGAs are the only vehicles for them, to be able to prototype, what they're conceptualizing and build software. So to me, if you look at Amazon, if you look at Google, if you look at Microsoft, what did they do? They built cloud infrastructure, they provided the DevOps environment, and they fast tracked the whole SaaS environment. So same thing could be done, I believe, even in the fabless ecosystem. All we need is credits from these established EDA as well as fabs that do shuttle runs at a very low cost. I think that's good enough for entrepreneurs, and there are enough angels and VCs who will write checks for this, ecosystem to kind of create a winner.
Ruchir, you are from an EDA background.
I knew it was coming to me.
Do you agree? And what do you think will it take for EDA companies to sort of become the big mentor, like say the AWSs and the Googles and the Azures of the world? What will it take for them to wear that hat?
Okay. So two parts to this question, right? Something that Satish talked about, and then coming to EDA companies and credits. So I can talk about what Siemens EDA is doing, and I'll talk about that first. For the past 5 years or so, we have created unique and specific business models for startups, where a startup can get access to our technology at orders of magnitude levels cheaper than what a commercial enterprise or an MNC would get. And those models have been in the industry for quite some time. At some point, we realized that maybe that is not sufficient. So then I also have to give a shout out to efforts like Safal from IESA and other incubators and other accelerators that have come into this area, the entrepreneur parks that we have in Bhubaneswar or Delhi or FabCI in Hyderabad. So Siemens EDA was the first EDA vendor to have a partnership with all these accelerators and incubators where we have put in our technology into the hands of Shuffle. And Shuffle and perhaps CI and others like that can bring in startup cohorts and get access to Siemens EDA technology for no extra charge to Siemens EDA. And that was a huge step. And Shuffle has seen the benefits of that in the last couple of years. The cohort size keeps on increasing. And Muthu is running the Shuffle ecosystem and leading that. So that's one side, right, on the EDA. And the other thing that typically happens is, one data point that I want to throw out. Satish talked about a $10 million investment that needs to happen in the first 2 years. If we break down the cost of building a semiconductor part from concept all the way to having a piece of silicon in hand, EDA tools contribute about 3 to 4% of that cost. Majority of that cost goes in human resources, compute resources, and getting the device manufactured. So despite us playing such a small role in the cost of the device, we have gone ahead and tied up with all of these agencies and trying to do our part. Then something that may come up later, the government of India is talking about the Fabless mission. We are actively working with MIT to create an infrastructure pool where not just the companies who are part of these accelerators that I mentioned, but even outside of that can get access to the technology. So that barrier more or less is out of the question. Now, I'm sure Sambit will talk about things that Intel is doing on the shuttles. There are companies who are talking about companies like IMEC, who are also participating in this ecosystem where they provide design kits and the technology transfer, silicon technology transfer and knowledge to the startups. So the groundswell is now starting to form. The one area where I know I have a slightly different opinion than Satish is about the money being available. Yes, the money is available. There is more money in the market for funding startups than the number of people asking for it. I will agree with him on that. Uh, what I am seeing on the ground is that the vast majority of investment firms, not VC firms, but even before that, and angel firms, need a little bit of education on how they can invest in a semi company, whether the company is making an IP or a piece of silicon eventually, and how they can exit with large multiples. So I think you asked us question specifically what we can do. I have a firm belief that the investor community in India who is educated about the semiconductor industry is very small, that percentage is very small. We need to expand that net so more investors come out, and the apprehensions that they may have about a longer gestation period of that capital, we should remove that.
Yeah, I'll take that question to Satish later about the investor sort of the herd
Yes.
mentality and what drives them. But before that, to Sambit, EDA, he gave an example. Intel, from where I come, I see that Intel and a couple of other companies like say Qualcomm and a whole lot of other MNCs, they are active in the ecosystem. They run some competitions, they give a grant here and there and all that. But beyond that, what is the level of engagement with these startups? You said Intel has worked with 35 startups in the last few years. What has been the extent of engagement? Would you say that we are one or two steps behind, right? So how can you take that one or two steps? What is needed to take that, bridge that gap?
Sure, good question. So first of all, there is enough money in the market. If I look at last 5 years of global silicon investments into startups, it has grown threefold from 1.2 billion to 3.7 billion in last 5 years, investing into silicon startups. So there is global money available, and these venture companies, they don't look at really where the ideas come from. It can come from India, can come from US, Peru, it doesn't matter. So there is money available if there is an idea. So there is absolutely no question about it. Now coming to really what the big companies are doing or can do or should do. First of all, I think the big companies can play a big role in first validating the idea. Anybody coming with an idea needs to be validated. the what and why. Is that important enough? Is that good enough? Okay. So validating the idea is definitely important. The second piece of it is providing assistance. And Intel, I'm pretty sure other companies, Qualcomm and other companies, they provide lots of assistance, access to technologies, access to compute assets, shuttles, go-to-market strategy, connecting with customers, connecting with the global team. We do that all the time, so that assistance. And even Intel has gone ahead and appointed 50 plus mentors at a senior level to guide these startups from start to finish. So this mentorship is also available. And the other thing I would say, somewhere I feel the big companies and the academics, the universities should come together. Just taking the learning from US, like how the big companies there and universities like Stanford, MIT, Harvard, all these things come together to incubate startups, and they have great successes. So I think that's something that we should look at, some of the big players to collaborate with the academics, and really how do we develop that entrepreneur mindset, and also guide the startups to succeed. So I think those are some of the things that we can do.
So Seema, if I can just add,
Sure.
we are right now talking about tangibles that EDA and large MNCs can contribute with in the ecosystem. One of the things that we sometimes tend to push down under the carpet a bit is all the reason we are talking about startups in India is because of these MNCs. I mean, I go back to my TI example. When TI was formed in 85, and you fast forward 10, 15 years, the first leadership of all the other companies that came had roots in TI or some connections in TI. And since then, somebody talked about the talent pool that Intel has created, and every other company, MNC that's out there. These are the companies who are exposing our engineers to the global market. These are the companies, all the MNCs are exposing our engineers to latest technology. And that becomes the foundation for an entrepreneur to take whatever they have learned in their MNC job and take it to the next level as an entrepreneur. So I believe that important contribution of the MNCs to the Indian ecosystem sometimes goes undervalued.
No, absolutely. If you see in the last few years, anything about semiconductor rolls up to either TI or Intel or some of these companies, right? So no question, deny. I mean, we cannot deny.
Yeah, we don't deny, we sometimes forget in the discussions that there is this huge contribution.
So,
Absolutely.
That,
Seema, just clarify what I said. I said, if you really look at the P&L of a startup and what does it cost them to tape out 2 revisions of a chip so that it is production ready. All I am saying is remove the payroll cost. I think payroll cost, entrepreneur knows how to get that funded, and they're investors. There is the EDA cost, there's embedded IP cost, and there's a shuttle run cost. And that's the significant amount of that $10 million. If Amazon was very aggressive because it was a startup, it grew from a startup to a giant technology company. That's why it could move really fast, encouraging the startup ecosystem. Google did that because Google grew from a startup, right? Whereas many others have been out there for a very, 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 very long time. Yes, they were startups in 60s or 70s, but not 2000s. So I think to fast track the fabless world, these companies will have to come together and enable entrepreneurs to experiment fast with lesser amount of money. And that's the only way many of them will do it.
This is a question to Sambit and Ruchi. You can take it. I'm told that, startups here, taking off from Satish's point, is that, even if I build a small component, say an IP, but I don't know if I can get it inside, say, an Intel stack or a Qualcomm stack or some other stack. And so that entry point, do you think MNCs are already sort of clearing that, or are we still away from that, that you think that, it's very difficult to get into, say, a big companies?
No, it's not difficult. Ruchi, if I may just start, is it is
Yeah,
okay?
please.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's okay because a lot of IPs, whether you do an Intel chip or a Qualcomm chip or NVIDIA chip, there are a lot of common IPs, so or common requirements of IPs. So if a startup has an IP idea, they can definitely reach out to any of the MNCs, and we will look at that IP idea and see whether it makes sense, whether we can integrate that into our products and generate value out of it. And if so, definitely we'll encourage it because this is a mutual relationship. The startups are trying to build a new business, and we are always looking for new innovations, new technology. So this would be possible, not an issue.
Yeah, so if I can just take off from where Sambit left, it's not impossible, and it's being done. And we have very good examples in India where IP companies have become successful, right? So the top three that come to my mind, and I'm sure that if I leave somebody out, it's not going to be good for me. Think of Cosmic Circuits, think of Psychon Labs, think of Serial Systems that we're going to hear from tomorrow. These companies are IP companies. They build IPs, and not just one IP, a collection of IPs. Then there are some companies who build one key IP. The thing that I think happens with a large MNC is when a new IP provider comes to talk to them, they want some validation. Because a company like an Intel or a Qualcomm who's going to build the big system on chip with an IP that comes from outside, they want to make sure that they're not carrying any risk. And that goes back to Satish's point that he said earlier. The IP may not be ready the first time, the first go around. It may have to go through a respin. It may have to go through a few iterations. So as an MNC, they would want to reduce their risk, but I don't think that they are saying no to IP coming from a new company or a smaller company. And then the exits that are available or business models that are available to the IP companies are also not just one, make an IP and somehow get it into the Intel stack. Yes, there is one, that's one option. Second option is if the portfolio of IP is good and has value in it, they will get an exit from a larger IP company, which is also something very good for the entrepreneur. The third example, we heard in the sessions today, we heard from Mobileye. Mobileye, if you think of it, is essentially an IP company who have built a system which can detect all road conditions, and they got acquired by Intel. So there are various business models and exit paths available to an IP design company, provided their IP is good, provided that their IP is verifiable and validated. Sambit, what would you think?
No, I completely agree, and I really like your idea that how Mobileye started as an IP company and went on to build a system company, and they got a pretty good price, from Intel, and doing well. So that's a great example.
Atul, you've heard all this and you've been working on various schemes in the government. There are two key problems in fabless semiconductor, or rather not problems, the wicked problems which need to be solved. One is, of course, money. Second is the market, because in semiconductor, there's no local market as such. There's no India market because India market is served by global companies. What is the government thinking about these two things? Can you give us a sense of that?
Yeah, sure. So, well, allow me to give you a quick background, right? So, the National Policy on Electronics, or the NP 2019, clearly lays down the largest strategic roadmap that the government of India has planned for the overall sector. So, the NP 2019 aims to position India as a global hub for ESDM, and by encouraging and driving capabilities in the country for developing core components, including chipsets, and creating an sort of enabling an ecosystem or environment for the industry to compete globally. So consequently, the NP 2019 also envisions the creation of a vibrant and dynamic fabless chip design ecosystem in the country by, by way of incentivizing startups and, sorry, are you saying something?
No.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So where was I? So by incentivizing startups and Indian design houses, probably through financial incentives as well as design infrastructure support across various stages of development and perhaps deployment. Now, of course, a few steps have already been taken in that direction, to be honest. Um, a lot, Ruchir and Sambit specifically spoke about talent. So, for example, the SMDP C2SD initiative, the special manpower development programs for chips to system design, an umbrella program under Digital India at more than 60 academic and R&D institutions. The holy trinity where, as Samvit mentioned, where academia, industry, and the government came together with representatives from all three on its board to focus on the design sector. And it has yielded fantastic results, right? 150 chips were worked on, of which 120 chips were fabricated in SCL Mohali and 30 in global foundries. When I say global foundries, I mean in foundries globally. Then you've had a bunch of other initiatives and programs also, such as the Swadeshi Microprocessor Challenge, CE and the Center of Excellence in Nanoelectronics at IIT Bombay, SENSE, or the Center for Nanoscience Engineering and Engineering at ISC Bangalore, along with a bunch of other GOI programs, right? Spark, GIA, and GIN Plus. Having said that, there is obviously a good reason to do a lot more. If we were to fulfill or rather meet the objectives laid out in the NP 2019. And as we are all aware here, the Minister of State, METI, or the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology recently announced, and in fact, Joint Secretary Mr. Saurabh Gaur, METI, also said this in this very IESA forum yesterday, that there's a lot of action happening in the background to work on and address the requirements of the fabless ecosystem with laser focus. Perhaps an entire policy on fabless. So we are now definitely a lot closer to where we are, and there should be an announcement soon on, the government's larger point of view on the fabless ecosystem. Now, yes, there are gaps, right? There are gaps that exist. I won't call them wicked problems, but we do, as the government, realize that there are gaps that need to be plugged in, and there has been a constant endeavor or a constant way forward, in the sense that we've been trying to plug those gaps proactively rather than reactively, right? So we first, the idea has always been to, to sort of integrate the value chain. We created and enablers through policy reformations, incentive schemes, things like that, to really re-energize the manufacturing ecosystem, integrate the manufacturing ecosystem. So everything from mobile phones to electronic components, then that segued into something much larger, right? We came up with the PLI for IT hardware, telecom network equipment manufacturing, things like that. So again, while, as you yourself mentioned, while the government continues to do what it does on fabless, etc., we've created the sort of downstream where there's a ready group of people who are more than happy to take the produce or the output of your fabs and fabless design ecosystems. Right now, of course, there to probably answer the second half of your question, there isn't really, there is no Indian market anymore. It's all global. And the idea then is, the government's aspiration then is to increase India's share in the larger pie, right? We need to be global players. We need to be people who are not only producing stuff, but also designing stuff, making stuff, and then consuming. I mean, we already have a consumer market, but to be a part of the larger ecosystem, we need to do a lot of things, and we have been working on that.
Okay, so I'll take it from here, and this question is for anybody to answer. Is that I think sometime back one of you said that of course there's no local market, but is there merit in saying that okay, you produce here and we'll consume whatever you produce? There are inherent risks in that kind of an approach, but do you think there's a merit? Because getting into the global sort of supply chain and market is, if it's very hard, do you think Indian government can say, okay, we'll be your consumer? Do you think that makes sense? Sambit, Ruchir, Satish, anyone?
I'm not a big fan of that.
Go ahead.
I'm not a big fan. I think, yes, there are some programs within the country like space or defense or cybersecurity, things like that, where I think the supply chains have to be local, consumption to be local. But otherwise, I think entrepreneurs are smart. They'll figure out how to sell everywhere. If they don't, then they should not be an entrepreneur.
So
I agree with Satish. Actually, it should be both. Which Satish mentioned is that certain programs like space or defense, can have the local consumption, and but the chips that we build is for global consumption, and so it should be both. And I think the MNCs can play a role in it, validating the idea, even creating awareness and education among the technologists in the country, really what problems to solve, what are really the things that are bothering. And also the MNCs can connect the entrepreneurs with global markets, global customers, uh, validated global. We MNCs in India, we can do that. Actually, we already do that. Maybe we should do more of it. And another thing I feel is that to grow startups, I think a few years back in Silicon Valley, some of the big companies used to spin off to generate that innovation. So maybe there's something that the MNCs should look at really, because today the big concentration of experience, I would say, is still with MNCs. So maybe the MNCs should look at how to do some of the spin-offs and nurture the startup mindset and startup revolution in the semiconductor space.
you're also an angel investor and probably 300 which is a year. Do you think, do you have anything to share from, how you read the Indian startups in the semicon space? Are they identifying the right problems to solve? Are they identifying, which customers to sell to? Because sometimes identifying the problem is like half the problem solved.
Very true. Identifying the problem is the real problem. You are absolutely right. Because if there is no problem, nobody is going to pay anyone to solve the problem. And I think that's where majority of I should not use the word majority. A lot of innovators make this first cardinal mistake of thinking of a solution before they identify the problem accurately. Uh, Yes, I have seen lots of pitches come my way, and I have invested in, as an angel investor in a lot of startups. I must say that of all the pitches that I have seen, hardly 5% of them are electronics or systems based. More than 95% of them are software based, or they're looking at a market which is still enabled by software. And the ones that did come to me when we started talking to them, it turned out that the problem definition and the market identification was their biggest pull. See, because as an investor, and Satish, chime in whenever you feel that you have something. As an investor, I can tell you what I look for. More than looking for what is my share of the pie in the market, I'm looking at what is the market size. Right? So if the market size is not clearly articulated by the startup, the motivation to invest in that startup reduces significantly. And I think that's where innovators from India uh, have some sort of a disadvantage today uh, because their access to the global markets is just emerging. Now, we have a lot of people who have done startups in India. And if you look at their profiles, they have been in the industry for a very long time. They have their own networks, large networks. But a startup ecosystem, in my opinion, is built by people who are in their 20s or 30s. And that's what builds the pyramid. And as the bottom fills out, some emerge from the top and they become unicorns and become really successful. So people who are in that level of experience, their access to knowledge is something that we should be working on and something that you talked about earlier as well. What specifically can we do? Right. So specifically talking about that, allow me an opportunity to plug in a panel discussion for tomorrow as well. And in that panel discussion, we are bringing in uh, an investor, we are bringing in a legal expert, we are bringing in an expert who has done this, been there, done that. thinking of an idea, thinking of a market, identifying the market. And we are bringing in somebody from STPI to talk about just these kinds of things. As an investor, then our expert will talk about what does he look for. So going back to my experience, the biggest difference is, again, Satish mentioned that if you're looking at a SaaS or a software-based idea or a solution, the cost of building and rebuilding is very little. So if they do not assess the market in the beginning accurately, they have the opportunity to go reassess it and rebuild. Applying simple design thinking of converge diverge methodology, they have many opportunities to do that, but in systems and semiconductor, they don't. So it becomes a critical component. Identify the market and identify it well. A specific example, if I can give, somebody came to us and came to me who had a fitness tracker for pets, just like we wear something on our wristwatch. And the idea was brilliant. We loved the idea, but the way they had scoped the market, they wanted to sell it in India with a price point which was above 10,000 rupees. Now, when they did their market study, they had made some assumptions which were not really validated. So we sent them back and said, hey, do your research and come back. So that's where I believe the basic issue lies.
Sure. Satish, do you agree? Because you also see a lot of pitches. In fact, probably you see more pitches than Ruchir. Would you agree that there are not enough ideas worth sort of funding or backing? And second question to you is, which is like from an earlier thread, is that there are not enough investors in this. So do investors interested in this segment need, because you can't expect to get multiple in like 12 to 18 months what we see in, say, a SaaS or a B2C companies.
Yeah, so let me answer the second question first, and then I'll talk about the multiples here are equally attractive. Yeah, no doubt. I think there are more decacorns in fintech and edtech and e-commerce and SaaS maybe than hardware. If you really look at semiconductor companies, Samanova raised money recently at $5 billion valuation, right? It's an AI chip company. Halo is a unicorn, AI, unicorn out of Israel. Then, Qualcomm bought Nuvia, and our own Rajiv Khemani, who's a good friend of probably many of us, sold Innovium to Marvell for $1.2 billion. So these are not, small ticket M&As or fundraisers. So there's a lot of money even in semiconductors. The question is, probably the numbers are not as many as in other sectors. The thing about investors, Seema, I mean, you know really well. I mean, you've had a very long journey talking to so many of us. I think investors flock, right, together where there is momentum. They'll learn, they'll go to classes, they'll talk to 20 people, and they'll go figure out how to invest once they see momentum. I mean, the same set of people who said, internet is useless or internet will not happen in India, ended up investing in internet companies from 2008 to 2018 and even now, right? What was education? All of us talked about, no, there has to be a classroom and there has to be a physical instructor, right? So I think to me, once there's momentum in a particular sector, investors automatically move to that sector, educate themselves and start deploying capital. It is really about creating playbooks. It's really about success stories. I think when you have one or two or three or four success stories, I think, if you look at Ruchi talked about cosmic circuits, that's 15 years ago, right? And if that's the only thing for 15 years that we can talk about, I mean, he's a good friend of mine, nothing against it, then that means there's not much happening in the ecosystem, right? It's clear, right? So to me, I think inspiration comes when you see something happening in your neighborhood, right? Because of that proximity, you develop knowledge. And then probably you create your better playbook than what you see. That needs to happen in, Fabless ecosystem. It could be, all the gentlemen here, Pradeep's, maybe we bring in Rajiv Khemani, we bring in all these Silicon Valley Indian entrepreneurs who built and sold companies very recently, right, for billions of dollars, and get them to probably network with these entrepreneurs, and at the same time get the fabs, get the EDA companies, IP companies to give credits to get it going, so that we can talk about 2 or 3 big winners, and then automatically the system will take off. You'll see velocity. There's enough money for every investor. Angel, Series A, Series B. There's enough money for every investor. It's not that there's only money for an angel investor, and later rounds, folks who invest don't make money. No, they do make money. But like you rightly pointed out, can I see the appreciation in 18 months? No, you can't. It'll take 3, 4, 5 years. But when you see that appreciation, it's solid appreciation. And the revenue, the way chip companies build their revenue is very non-linear. 3 years, they're testing product. If they design into a volume, a production, kind of an application, they go 50 million, 200 million, 500 million, like in 3 years. You can't see that with SaaS. You can't see in any other industry the non-linear revenue curve if you really get that product market fit right.
Yeah, if I may just add a little bit, if that's okay with you, Seema.
Sure.
I mean, there are some semiconductor companies which have been bought for pretty good prices even before they saw silicon. So I think in semiconductor, what I've seen, I can't generalize it, but what I've seen is the credibility of the founders and the team is important for investors to invest into. And second is if the startups can really build a complementary technology to some of the MNCs, whether Intel, Nvidia, Broadcom, Qualcomm, I think that also plays a big role. So credibility of the team, the founders, and complementary technology with one of these big companies is important, in my opinion.
Sure. I'm also looking at the time. I need to sort of start wrapping it up. One final question, and then I'll put one common question to all. Many times I've heard SaaS in last 30, 40 minutes, like, SaaS companies does, even though SaaS is very different from semiconductor in so many ways. But if Fabless Semiconductor is SaaS today, or has to become like SaaS today, then there's one big sort of difference that we need to understand and solve for, is that in SaaS, you can be very easily close to your customer. But in semiconductor, you cannot plug yourself into the customer's sort of, roadmap, because you are a couple of steps away from the end user or the end customer. So how do you solve for that? Anyone, all of you are eligible to answer.
I can chime in very quickly. No, it was no different for SaaS. Girish moved to San Francisco to scale his company. Sridhar for Zoho was living in the Bay Area. I don't disagree. Today, SaaS companies can sell digitally, right? Because you could distribute, market, and sell digitally. Semiconductor companies is very difficult. You need to be close to customers. I think the entrepreneurs will have to bring in the right team members in marketing and sales and establish the right geographical presence, where their customers are, to scale the company. And that requires a lot of capital. So once you prove your idea, you need to be able to raise decent amount of capital to be able to go do it.
Yeah, Satish is absolutely right. I will just add on to what he said. Um, be- Being close to the customer is critical for any business, whether it's a startup or an established business, because that's where the business will succeed. I think what makes semiconductor and hardware different from a software product is because it's easier, and especially in the last 20 months or so, we have learned to be digitally close to a customer. And that works much better for software solutions than hardware solutions. But there is nothing that can replace the mind share that the solution provider will get and will benefit from by being close to the customer. There is no alternative for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
in addition, I want to say that apart from the customer, other way is to build that complementary relationship with the MNC, so that the MNC also gets invested in your company and they help you in all sorts, including taking to the customer.
Okay, Atul, final question to you. Success in semiconductor sector is very different from success in other areas. So here, you can make a quiet, nice exit and still be successful, but in the eyes of the world, probably, you're not there. So when the government is trying to sort of, really back up this sector. Do you have a definition of success in your mind at Invest India, that we need to be this big or we need to have X, Y, Z? What is your definition of success? If you're coming out with say, a couple of schemes, a roadmap, and a target for a fabless semiconductor.
That's an interesting question. I mean, of course, we do have our targets and numbers, which run into billions, trillions, and there's this larger idea about, whenever we make these schemes, I mean, it works within a paradigm, a budget, and with a target in mind, right? But I think when you talk about success, each time we work on a policy or on a scheme, and when we pretty much get together on day one and try to come up with the scheme in itself, the idea is always simple. It's very straightforward. It is what sort of unifies everyone who works, at least in Invest India, which is the idea of around nation building and all that. For us, success is simple. It's Atmanirbhar. Now, it is a very cliche term, Atmanirbhar Bharat or a self-reliant Bharat, but that is what we all strive towards. That is what success to us is. That is what success for Make in India is, and that is what the Make in India or the Atmanirbhar program is. Right? The idea that we are self-reliant in whatever we do, and there is no dependency on immediate neighbors or any other country for that matter, or anything, right? We have a huge import bill, lots of dollars being spent on importing things that can pretty much happen in the country, not immediately, hopefully sometime soon. But I mean, I wouldn't really drag on this. For us, success is a self-reliant India.
I'll have to interrupt you there, because Atmanirbhar is a very broad, amorphous kind of a thing, and I don't agree with that, but we can agree to disagree. So
Of course, absolutely.
this up question for our panelists.
Yeah, so we do have a question from the audience. Seema, if I may.
Sure, please go.
I think firstly, I'll compliment the panel on such a lively discussion, and especially compliment Seema for accommodating and being flexible, but at the same time making sure that we had a very lively discussion. So we have little time for questions because, like you rightly pointed out earlier, pretty much out of time. The first question that we have received from the audience is actually for Satish. Satish, what are one or two tips you can give an upcoming ESDM company to make sure that they have a higher probability of obtaining investment? I know there is no one or two point answer to this, but broadly, if you were to paint, because you talked a lot about opportunities exist, ventures are looking at ESDM space, it is not that it is completely dry. So what are one or two tips you would give entrepreneurs? But if you do this, you increase your probability, especially in the ESDM space. And I will add, that was from the audience, but let me add a few additional points to that. I think Seema also captured it, and Ruchir also mentioned that there's a lot of awareness that needs to be created, but you are of a different opinion that it is there. This just needs to happen. So can you elaborate on that? So,
yeah, I'll keep it short and make it quick. I think Ruchi talked about what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? It's very, very important. So do enough of your customer competition, market diligence to kind of arrive at your product idea, number one, or solution idea, IP, it doesn't matter, whatever it is. Two, I think go to all the successful people and sell your idea to begin with, right, within India, because you are going to start from India. Your headquarters could be anywhere. I mean, Delaware or Singapore or wherever. Get angels, good angels to underwrite, the first check. And then it's very important to identify critical success factors for your company. So if you are an engineer and if your company also requires a great marketeer and a salesperson, again, you have to sell and get those people on board early on very quickly. A lot of people do this mistake because they're brilliant engineers, they have tons of patents, they don't surround themselves with sales and marketing talent in the founding team. I'm not talking about recruiting them later. For an engineer, they think that, we'll hire a sales guy when we raise capital. That's an easy job. No, that's not an easy job. You require product marketing management function from day one. You require sales business development, strategic business development function from day one. So if you do these three things well, I think you have a good chance of success. And you got to continuously create awareness about your company in terms of for people to take notice.
Thank you, Satish. And there's one more question for Sambit, actually, from the audience. Sambit, this question is, you have mentioned that we should be making in India for the world. You also talked about the 70 products that you worked on. So what is it that people should look for when they are looking at making a product for the world? Because generally, I guess, in the earlier conversation, there was a discussion around not to restrict yourself to any specific market. And you kept, multiple times reiterating that we should be looking at the global market. And anything we make should be something that is a solution, not just for India, but from a global perspective. Would you like to throw some light on that?
Sure. I think definitely agree with a lot of points Satish made and Ruchi made earlier. The what and why, what problem are you solving? I think that is important. Uh, that's critical. And I think a lot of the startups also struggle with they can't take a good idea to reality to execute it well. So I think it's extremely important that we execute well and have a good conclusion to that idea. Whether it's building the chip, delivering to the features or power performance targets, just to making sure that you deliver that product on time with quality, with the intended features. And a lot of startups fail to execute or take the idea to a reality properly. So I think you have to be careful about execution. And I would say take help from everybody, take help from MNCs, take help from government, take help from academics, take help. And of course, can't undermine the value of customer engagement and early access to customers and validating the idea and sales and marketing. All those are important. But please pay attention to the translating that idea, assuming it's a good idea, to reality, and execution is important.
Thank you, Sambit. So those were the questions. Since we're running out of time, Seema, if you're okay with it, we can close here. But
yeah, I'm itching to ask just one question to Satish because it's a slightly offbeat question, and I'm sure the audience will like it. Is that how has being associated with the Badminton Academy in Hyderabad helped you as an investor? Has it changed your approach to investing?
Yeah, so Seema, in fact, Gopi is one of the founders of my fund, India Partners. You wouldn't believe when he started out, I'm just a volunteer, right, with Gopi. When he started out, he had this big dream of providing a great platform, right, so that many Indian badminton players would be top ranked, would be Olympians, and would also win medals in various events at the world level. All he did is he brought the infrastructure and then he brought in right sets of coaches, nutritionists, physiotherapists, and gave them enough exposure. So that's holistic environment, right? So infrastructure, sports gear, coaches, nutritionists, physiotherapists. So that gave them kind of a platform and then enough exposure to enough number of tournaments so that you're not sitting there crying if you lose one tournament saying, oh, the Olympics is going to be 4 years from now, or Commonwealth is going to be again 4 years from now, kind of a cycle. If you're playing 20 ranking tournaments, you know that another tournament is there next month, you have another chance. So that's one part. The second part is, as I said, success kind of breeds success. I think it's been done even in IT services. I think all the big successful companies gave birth to next generation companies. When you look at Persistent Systems or Mindtree or Happiest Minds, I think they all had roots in the bigger companies like Wipros and Cognizants. Same thing. I mean, whether it is iSpirit, what NASCOM did to IT services, I think iSpirit kind of started out helping out product companies. The Product Nation was kind of a dialogue they got started. I think today SaaS Boomi is very active for all the SaaS companies. I think similarly, even for Fabless, I think you need to establish a platform where folks can get together and share their knowledge. And I think we can borrow how, there are a lot of parallels between sport and entrepreneurship because both of them are very, very tough. You take risk, you make quick decisions, you lose, you got to, wake up and then compete again, and then you take risk. So hence, I think a lot of things you can borrow, and this guidance is available from all these folks, whether it's Abhinav Bindra, Gopi, or Rahul Dravid, or any of them.
Okay. On that note, thank you all for being part of this, and thank you for taking all kinds of questions from me. That's it.
It was a pleasure. Seema, thank you so much.
Sure.
Yep, thank you. Thanks to all of you on the panel.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate you being flexible for us. Thank you, everybody.